Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Context. We have a great show for you today. I am joined this week by my co-founder, Will Chan, here at Acorn, who was kind enough to step in while Darren is out this week on vacation. And we have some great sessions for you all about MCP-related topics. Specifically today, we're going to be talking a lot about security and sort of the next generation of gateways. So it should be a exciting set of content. Just anyone who is new to the show or seeing it for the first time, we have some fantastic content already up, some great presentations that have been coming in, both from the MCP Dev Summit that we hosted in San Francisco and from the context. So if you're on the YouTube channel, take a look at some of these. We have great discussions from like David Soryapara, who's one of the founders of MCP, talking about the most recent release. We've got a lot of great conversation about how to manage lots of tools, different tools, how to build in OAuth, how to focus on security. So, take a look at the stuff. There's some great things. We try to keep things pretty quick and short. So most of these are less than 20 minutes. And we really do try to give you a variety of different luminaries of the industry. And so today we've got Pat White from Traego, who's going to be talking about the API gateway and sort of the future of it and what it means for the enterprise. And first up will be Ravi from Scalekit. And Ravi's going to talk to us all the way from Bangalore about how to bring OAuth to MCP servers in a really, really quick and easy way. So he's told me 4 lines of code or 4 steps. I can't remember what it was. It was very short. So that should be a lot of fun. Then next week, we've got some interesting talks as well. We'll be talking to Stephen over at who's working on micro VMs, and he's got some really interesting perspective about how micro VMs could run AI agents that I know Darren was super excited about. So we're going to have that conversation next week, and then we're going to have a GraphQL discussion with Michael over at Apollo GraphQL. So lots of good stuff coming. Be sure, if you're interested in presenting, if you've got a cool solution, if you've built something interesting, to submit a talk. We love having guests. We love hearing about innovation in the space. This is a pretty easy place to come and present what you're working on. It's really your floor, your opportunity to share the ideas you have about where the space is going and what you're building. So just a quick update. Our format is pretty strict. We try to keep all the talks to 20 minutes. We try to do at least 1 or 2 every week. And we keep things tight. It's we try to keep people from running over. So Ravi and Pat have both promised me they're going to be well under 20 minutes. So nothing to worry about today. If you have questions, fire them off on YouTube. If you're watching there, if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Twitch, if you're on X, we should see most of them. Most of them come in here to the StreamYard. So fire them in, and we'll try to bring your questions to the speakers. And with that, let's go. So our first talk today is from Ravi Madabhushi. He's going to be talking about Dropin OAuth for MCP servers. Ravi, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We at Scalekit, we are building modular authentication platform for AI applications. Just to give a brief history, me, my co-founders, and the leading architects at Scalekit, we built authentication platform, and we struggled with it for 5 years at Freshworks. We had to get it right because we were serving more than 100,000 companies. There are 2 million daily active users, and we were selling to SMBs and enterprise, and everyone had kind of different authentication requirements. And we kind of realized that, hey, this is getting extremely painful, and this is not how it should be. So we started Scalekit in 2023 to make sure that we build the auth platform we wish we had for every other company out there in the world. So now coming right to the topic. So if you look at last 20, 25 years of how software has been built, people used to build applications and then they used to give it to their customers and say, this is what I built, use it, solve your problem, right? And now they kind of started opening up APIs and then said, hey, I understand that I may have solved some of your problems, but then if you have some custom problems that you want to solve using my platform, you can use my APIs and customize the hell out of it, right? If you have a specific workflow that you want to use my APIs. But these APIs are meant to be used by developers who understands how these APIs work. They need to go through your developer documentation and they write code to invoke these APIs and get the customization done. Now it is all MCP servers. Now these MCP servers actually unlock the customizability of these applications beyond just developers, right? Now, normal non-coders can use the MCP servers and then talk in simple English and get whatever they want to get done using these MCP servers. So AI agents are now able to trigger actions and get data, do whatever they want using these MCP servers based on the MCP tools that are exposed by these MCP servers. This MCP servers is great, right? The protocol has become really powerful, standardized way to give access to LLMs, power to do certain actions in third-party applications, right? So now, if you just take a look at how the MCP servers and protocols and authentication around these MCP servers evolved over a period of time, when MCP kind of first launched late last year, there's a lot of adoption really, really quickly, but most of these MCP servers are kind of STDIO based servers where user who wants to use an MCP server that is built by someone, they would kind of need to download the program on their local machine and they have to run it using either Node program or Python program or whatever, right? So it is not really a scalable and enterprise ready application. You can't ask all your customers to download some software and then execute it, and it'll have all sorts of permissions. It's a major security problem, right? Now, over a period of time, it evolved to using streamable HTTP, which is great because it is stateless. That means I can run a server in my machine, just like how I would serve APIs or any other web application servers that I'm doing. Now, I'll be able to use the same learnings that I have on how to build a scalable, reliable, a secure, and servers, and then usually adapt it to MCP servers also. But one thing that kind of was missing when streamable HTTP came in March of this year is, hey, what about the authentication for these, right? So even though there was HTTP-based MCP servers, the authentication for these servers still either it used to be OAuth or just API keys that are passed as environment variables, right? Which is ugly, right? Now, fortunately, the entire community kind of led by David Para and all the other great folks who made sure that we need a secure authentication layer for these remote MCP servers. Now, OAuth 2.1 has been chosen as a de facto mechanism. Kind of MCP spec made it mandatory that every remote HTTP server that needs authentication should have an OAuth 2.1 based authentication so that it's secure, reliable, and scalable. But it's not really easy to just build an OAuth server for your MCP server, right? So if you go to Reddit, if you see a lot of comments that you say, hey, how do I add an auth layer to my MCP server? My MCP client does not work really well with this particular auth spec, right? So there's a lot of confusion and it's kind of an, I would say, unnecessary pain of having to add an auth server if you just want to build a simple weather MCP server. So that's when we realized, hey, it should be easier than this. It kind of triggers the same pain that we had to go through in our Freshworks days. And this is one of the reasons why we started Scalekit. How do we make auth easy for anyone who is building API servers or MCP servers or agentic authentication capabilities, right? So we are introducing our Dropin OAuth solution where you can add OAuth authorization layer for your MCP server in just 4 steps. And you don't have to know anything about OAuth. Step 1, you register your MCP server with Scalekit so that we know what is your MCP server, where is it hosted, and all sorts of simple parameters. And then you broadcast to everyone that you are an OAuth protected resource and your authorization server is with Scalekit. This is published via a well-known OAuth protected resource metadata. Again, it's just a standard public way of telling any MCP client that wants to talk to you, saying, hey, I'm a protected resource. You need to get a token from my authorization server, get a token, and then talk to me. And the third step is whenever an MCP client sends a token to your server, you need to validate that, hey, yeah, this JWT token is issued by my Scalekit server and it is meant to be used by me. The token is still valid, so I can go ahead and allow this MCP request to go ahead, right? And fourth step, again, which is optional, if you want to be really, really strict about what scopes do you want the users to grant to certain MCP client to access their resources, you can also add an extra layer by validating whether the token that the MCP client sent you has the necessary scopes to do certain actions. Yeah. Now, demo time. I'll show you quickly what does it mean to build an MCP server and then protect using Scalekit powered authorization layer. So we have built, I'm going to run my MCP server. It is running right now. So I'm going to quickly show you, this is a very simple MCP server, which has two tools, which tells who the user is, that is MCP client is accessing on behalf of, and get some weather data based on server location, right? So let me quickly show you, I told you about 4 steps. Now I'm going to show you all those 4 steps right now. So first step, like I said, you need to register your MCP server. This is the Scalekit dashboard that you're seeing. You come to the Scalekit dashboard and then you register your MCP server. Hey, what is the name of the server? When the user wants to grant access to this MCP client, they need to know which MCP server they're actually giving access to, right? And what is the resource identifier? This is the unique identifier of your MCP server. This is typically where you would have hosted your remote MCP server. And the next part is allow dynamic client registration. Again, dynamic client registration DCR is one of the ways that MCP clients can register themselves to the MCP servers dynamically without the user having to do any manual OAuth client registration, just like how you would do if you want to do login with Google and things like that. Right? This actually powers the MCP clients to automatically register themselves as OAuth clients via Scalekit without you having to do anything. And you configure certain settings like, hey, do you want to set the token for 60 minutes or 3 hours or 20 days or whatever you want it to be, and then you're done, right? Now, all that is a step 1. Now, step 2, I spoke about step 2 being you need to broadcast to the world that your MCP server is an OAuth protected resource. So this is just an Express.js based node server. So all you need to do is you have a well-known OAuth protected resource and you send this standard JSON metadata, like what is the name of this resource? Who is your authorization server? And what kind of bearer methods are supported? Is it supported in the bearer token in the header, or is it body, and things like that? If someone wants to read the documentation about your MCP server, where should they go? Or what scopes are supported? Right? So it's a simple JSON that you send as part of your well-known so that any MCP client that wants to talk to you knows where to go to get the token, right? This is step 2. Now, what is step 3? Like I said, you just need to validate the token. Here, I wrote a very simple Express middleware that just checks whether there is an bearer token in the authorization request headers or not. It's very simple. Just check whether there is a token. If there is no token, there is an error. You also validate whether the token is perfect or not. That's what this does. You check the claims in the JWT token. Is it issued by your Scalekit server? Who is the audience? What is the expiry time? What is the NDF claim? You just make sure that the token is valid and it's meant to be used for your MCP server. That's all you need to do. And in case the token is not right, you send a 401 error to the MCP client with the www header. So the MCP client knows that you are an OAuth protected resource and they need to go to the registered authorization server to get a token. You don't have to do anything. MCP clients will automatically take care of it. Now, let me quickly open Claude to see what it does. I've already registered this MCP server in my Claude configuration. Let me quickly show you This is my Cloud Desktop config. I've added this as my MCP server, and I said I'm looking for weather read as a scope. So what you saw right now is Claude saw that I registered an MCP server, and it tried to communicate with this MCP server, but my MCP server sent an unauthorized request back to the MCP client, which is Cloud Desktop. So Cloud Desktop now is asking for authorization to my Scalekit service. So the user would have to grant access to the Cloud Desktop to make sure that they get the token to access the MCP server. Again, all of this is automatically handled, comes out of the box. You don't have to lift a finger. Now, if you see, MCP CLI proxy wants permission to retrieve the weather information. The user would authorize, and that's done. Now, when you open Claude and then ask something like, who am I? This is perfect. This is one of those times when demo gods don't work in your favor. Let me restart my MCP server and Claude 2, just in case. Yeah, authorization is done. Let's directly check for the weather information. So if you see, I had an MCP tool called get weather details. It made the MCP call and got the data right. Like I told you, I had another tool that's there called who am I. So it is meant to give you details about which user is currently authorized to access data. So it says, hey, right now, Ravi plus weather at scalekit.com is the authorized user because the token is associated with this user. And based on this token, the MCP server allowed these requests to happen, right? So this is a very quick and powerful way to add auth layer to your MCP servers. Again, just to recap, it's a 4-step process, maybe 5 lines of code, 6 lines of code, regardless of what language. It can be Node, Python, Go, doesn't matter, because the entire OAuth handshake is happening by the MCP client in the browser. And all you need to do is make sure that all your MCP requests that are coming from the clients have a valid token, verify that the token is meant for you, and Scalekit handles all the ugly details of DCR and PKCE and OAuth 2.1 and everything else. So now great, your MCP server is able to have an authorized request every time an MCP client is making a request. But more often than not, based on the user's context, you would want to access third-party applications like Gmail, or Slack, or Notion on this user's behalf so that this MCP server can do something meaningful. So we are also introducing Agent Connect, where we have pre-built integrations for more than 100 plus applications. We manage the authentication across all these applications, whether it be OAuth2-based authentication, API keys-based authentication, don't have to worry about it. And then there is built-in tool calling so that when you get a request for a particular user, you verify the token, and on that user's behalf, you can actually get something done on that user's behalf in third-party applications like Slack. You can send a message in Slack, you can send an email, or you can draft a beautiful doc for that user in Notion. You can do both authentication and authorization for your MCP server, and also use the data that is presented and take action in third-party application on that user's behalf. That's it. Scalekit. We are a modular authentication and authorization platform for AI applications. You can sign up on scalekit.com, or if you would like to go through the documentation, you can go to docs.scalekit.com, where we have documented how to add OAuth layer for your MCP servers in 4 steps. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Ravi. So help me with a couple things. So one, Scalekit is a SaaS, right? It's not a toolkit or something that I implement in my app. It's a SaaS-based service.
That's right.
What's the business model then? Is it, do I pay for certain features? Is there some stuff I can try for free? Like how do you guys charge for the services?
Yeah, it's a great question. So today we are charging based on the number of tokens that we issue on your behalf for your service, because that's actually the problem that we are solving for you.
You mean
Making sure that,
or you mean LLM token? You mean identity tokens, right?
I meant the JWT tokens, yeah, not the model tokens.
And so how does that work then? So who do you, like, give me an example of a customer a little bit. Is this sort of built for other sort of SaaS providers who want to offer their platform as an MCP? Is that who you see as your main customer?
That's right. So today we have a lot of customers who are using Scalekit authorization platform for their web applications or their API servers. So these customers actually pulled us saying, hey, we also have MCP servers. Can you build an auth layer for it? And that's when I realized that a lot of people who are trying to build their MCP servers so they can expose their kind of tools to their customers are struggling to build a simple OAuth-based authentication layer. So that's where the problem surfaced, and we realized, hey, can I add an auth layer for your MCP server so that you can focus on your business logic where you're building MCP servers to share with your customers?
So in a lot of ways, this is very similar to sort of a UI identity management product. So the original Scalekit was sort of a UI SaaS product for teams that wanted to drop in identity management into a service they were building. And now you're extending that to the MCP layer. I get that now. So how does AgentKit fit in though? That feels like it's out of left field compared to this. Like that's not for the same buyer, is it? Like or does that allow the user to consume auth options that are already there instead of having to run their own auth?
It's a great question. So what we realized, again, most of our customers, they're SaaS applications and they don't live in isolation. They want to add powerful workflow automation to their customers. Hey, when something happens in my application, do something else, or send a notification in email, or pull some data, or send this contact to HubSpot, or send this data to Salesforce. So what they realized is they need both ends of the spectrum for their MCP server, one that handles authentication for all the incoming requests, but sometimes they need to use the data to make authenticated requests to third-party applications on that user's behalf. So they're looking for one solution that can handle authentication layer on both ends of their MCP server, where their MCP server, some of them is their core business logic, but some of it is where they need to power workflows that kind of connect the identity that is there in their application with third-party application data.
So, for example, I go to the website for my gym and I log in and I'm working in there and I want to schedule something. I could authorize it to schedule directly with my Google Calendar and add it to my calendar without having to download and deal with all that. Just through, hey, do you want me to add this to your calendar? Yes, authorize us to talk to Google. So you're seeing it more that way, that the agents will be calling out to. I'm guessing those aren't MCPs on the other end, though. They're just calling direct to API. So you've built API hooks directly into those, because you're probably not talking to a Google Calendar MCP right now, are you?
We're not. Yeah, we are building our own MCP servers for all these applications, so that sometimes they're direct tool calls, or you may want to say, hey, create a calendar. Remind me to pick up my kid at 5 p.m. today. So it'll create a calendar invite on your behalf.
There was a question on the chat from Jeffrey, and he just asked if Scalekit communicates with an IDP or Scalekit itself is an IDP.
That's a great question, actually. So Scalekit itself is an IDP, but we also added a layer where we can communicate with your existing auth layer. Like, for example, you build your own homegrown auth system for the last 5 years, and you don't want to replace everything just because you like what you see here, right? So Scalekit can communicate with your existing auth system, either via OADC, or we even have custom protocol, so that you can tell Scalekit, hey, this is the current logged in user, and Scalekit takes that user's identity and then completes the rest of the TCR, which is dynamic client registration, or issuing tokens on that user's behalf to the MCP client. So we have both flavors.
Awesome. All right. Well, Will, anything you wanted to ask, Rob?
I think the question you asked was on the Agent Connect, because Ravi went by so quick there. But is that meant for your an MCP developer server to talk with potentially these other connections and interact with it, and then you help with the OAuth process or something? Is that how that agent connected? It's not exposed as MCP server. I wouldn't go to Claude and somehow add a Notion MCP server and you host it or redirect it as a remote. You don't do any of that, right?
Yeah, we don't.
Okay. And then the other question I have, so Scalekit, if I was a developer MCP server and I want to register Scalekit, that means I'm not a OAuth expert, but I would have to, any user I want to use it now would have to register and get an account with the Scalekit and log in through Scalekit in order to access that particular MCP server. Correct? Is that how that works?
That's a great question, Will. I mean, it ties back to what Shannon asked earlier. Yeah. So Scalekit itself can manage identity for your application. Let's say you are building a gym scheduling application, correct, right? Yeah. And users need to log into your product or application to do whatever they want to do, register for a certain calendar slot, right? You could use Scalekit for human authentication for your gym product, or you could have already built something in-house and you don't want to rip and replace because you want to use Scalekit for your MCP authentication. So if you want to use Scalekit for your gym app also, that's great. We can do that. But you want to use whatever you're using right now for your web application, but just for the MCP, if you want to use Scalekit, we can integrate with your existing auth layer so that the user doesn't have to register with Scalekit second time.
Got it.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
There was one more question from Jeffrey, actually. He said, understanding that the OAuth initialization process started by the client, does most of the clients support this flow already? Does that make sense to you? I got a little lost on the question, but I figured
it does. It does, because we've been through that pain, right? See, today, not a lot of MCP clients are OAuth ready yet, right? And that's where there is this bridges like the MCP remote, which acts as a proxy, which bridges. Claude works really well for SDDO-based MCP servers. So this MCP remote acts as a bridge to connect SDDO with OAuth. Yeah, but I think it's just a matter of time. Most of these MCP clients would become OAuth ready very, very soon. But yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, we should keep moving. Thank you, Ravi, so much for joining us all the way from Bangalore and presenting Scalekit. It sounds interesting. It looks like scalekit.com, easy enough to find. So if people have other questions, I'm sure they can find you on socials.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
You're very welcome. All right. Pat, have you got your presentation all queued up?
Well, let's get started here. Thanks so much, Shannon, for having me. That was super interesting. Great to see people working on these problems. It's just super exciting. And he was Ravi was absolutely spot on, because I went through and did a pretty exhaustive look at all of the different clients that work with the new the new OAuth MCP protocols, and it's very it's like highly variable. For folks that are out there doing development work, VS Code is amazing. Like, honestly, like even if you're not like primarily using it for your coding, they've done a great job supporting every single thing that MCP comes out with. They're super involved in all of the discords and all that kind of stuff. The second MCP comes out with anything, all the new protocol versions, all that, VS Code already has it supported. So everything from like the new OAuth flows to elicitation, the structured output, all of that is supported by VS Code. So that's just sort of like for folks that are out there looking to either do development or like utilize or exercise their particular tool. VS Code is great for it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and chat about this. Today we're going to be talking about API gateways and how they start to relate to MCP. And I know this is kind of a funny topic here, but the high level is that enterprises are starting to adopt MCP. And it is a incredibly complex job to go for. What we're going to talk about today is this idea of like, how do you go from an enterprise topology, which would generally have an API gateway, where you might have 10, 1,000, 20,000 different REST endpoints. And how do you start to move to a world where you're going to AI enable that, and then enable that for through MCP? So that's the high level of this talk here, and it should be pretty fun. So that's we'll just run through like what is an API gateway, what's the current modern like AI workload looking like, and then we'll run through a few different things, and we'll end with a little bit of a demo about what Traego does and how we're approaching this. My name is Pat. There's two things that I'm here talking about. Traego is we're building a kind of an AI gateway, an AI nexus. We'll talk about what that means, and so you can check that out, traego.com. And then I'm one of the things that we built at Traego is called ScaledMCP. It's a Go library for a horizontally scalable MCP server. So for folks that have been building MCP servers, one thing you'll find is that it is very, very hard to scale them horizontally. Mostly because MCP itself is a stateful protocol. So if you do any of the interesting stuff like elicitation or notifications or anything like that, you have to have some sort of message broker. We built this with that in mind, and obviously we use it at Traego to kind of scale out our major infrastructure here. So let's talk about API gateways really quickly, and then we'll move on to kind of like how that works in a MCP AI world. There was this time where basically, people had these giant monolithic enterprise applications, and you would basically have this one single place that hosted your API, and basically all of the REST endpoints would hit this one single server, and that's how it all kind of worked. Over time, as enterprises developed, what happened is they started building these things called microservices. I'm sure everyone knows what a microservice is. It's a tiny little bit of code that runs it. And what happens is because you had like 10 different services running all over the place, you had to add a layer in front of them that enables, a REST call comes in and you need to point to the right microservice. So you ask for a to-do list and it goes to the to-do microservice. You ask for the, Ravi had that great example of who am I, that'll go to the authentication microservice. And you can see as you start to talk about this, you can already start to see how this kind of is like MCP and agents. So we're going through this whole new world where suddenly we're revisiting what it's going to take to run an enterprise architecture, and how we're going to ingest data and expose data and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the stuff that was happening at the API gateway was things like authentication authorization, which is now, again, a huge problem in the MCP space. So this idea that like we had this really nice world, like we as enterprise architects had this really nice world where you could deploy your enterprise gateway, your API gateway, you could add security rules and say, okay, only Bob can get to that to-do list microservice, but anyone can call into that who am I endpoint. Well, now we're in the MCP world and we can't really kind of do that because, API gateways, and I'll say the number one reason that you can't just point something like Claude or something like an API, any of the LLMs that are out there at an API gateway is twofold. One is they tend to be very bad at handling REST URLs alongside JSON data objects. So that's why MCP exists in general. Like I know it's sort of a silly thing to say, and everyone, if you're on this, you probably know why MCP exists. But like a lot of people, you see this on Reddit all the time. People are always asking like, why do we need MCP? Why don't we just use OpenAPI? And the issue is that OpenAPI is actually not great at at creating something that an LLM can consume. There's a lot of stuff that's not required. There's a lot of stuff that is superfluous, and then there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't have required documentation, things like that. And so, but we as enterprise architects, we got used to this idea of having an API gateway that's going to do our security layer. It's going to do our protocol translation. So a lot of API layers that are out there. Now, this also should start to like ring bells with folks in the AI world, which is a lot of the API gateways that are out there will be able to go from like, oh, hey, we have this super, super, super old, weird, you couldn't even call it RESTful. It's like using this bizarre protocol that we want to make RESTful. And so the API gateways can actually do that bridging for you. Or we have gRPC that we want to start exposing. We have REST on the back end, or we have WebSockets, all that kind of stuff. That again should get you thinking about how this impacts your MCP world, because we're having that issue. That issue is happening very quickly. I know this is an MCP centric talk that we're sort of having here, but at the end of the day, it is, there are so many different protocols that are coming out. There's A to A, there's MCP, IBM forked MCP, Cisco launched their own version of MCP. Everybody is coming out with this. And the idea is because MCP isn't anything particular, like it's a really cool protocol, but all they did is they took the model for tool calls and they applied that to a HTTP transport protocol. And so it's not like this isn't like amazing revolutionary. You're going to see more and more of these guys come out there. And so like it's not insane to think that over the next couple of years there will be many, many, many different protocols. So like you need like the idea of the API gateway that was doing that marshaling between REST and gRPC and these different things is actually super useful. Will continue to be super useful. But obviously API gateways don't work because they're not useful for what you need from an LLM. And then traffic management, load balancing, that's all still useful. So let's talk like super briefly about like the modern AI workload. And one thing I love talking about here is in the MCP world, we really, really, really over rotate on the developer use case. And I know that's because so many of us are developers and this is like what we do. So like we all sit around thinking about like, oh, I love coding in my IDE, and I have it like, connected to Figma and pull that down. I use that MCP server. It's great. But at the end of the day, like that's not the end game for MCP and for AI in general is not developers. It is everybody else out there, right? Is everybody else out there either, Ravi was mentioning a scheduling app. We talk, I think, a lot about knowledge workers. Microsoft laid off 9,000 people because they wanted to replace them with AI. So those are knowledge worker use cases that they need to use. So that's what we all know. But it's really important as you're thinking about bringing AI and MCP to your enterprise. One thing, or if you're a developer out there who's really passionate about MCP and you're thinking about how to enable for the enterprise, one thing to remember is that you can't most folks can't install an MCP server, and most security departments are super uncomfortable having random node code running on their clients. And so like that's, Anthropic just recently launched their directory, that's not going to make a lot of security teams at big enterprises happy. And so, one of the things that this is, we're going to have to start thinking about this user experience for the developer, for the non-developers out there. And something to get really excited about, and something that I love is that piece of it. The other thing that we forget about in the MCP world, like again, we think about the developer use case all day long. We forget about agents. Like, to be super honest, a lot of this stuff in MCP is we're not actually thinking about agents consuming them. We're thinking about LLMs inside of thick clients consuming them. We're thinking about these different, like inside of your IDE. We don't always think about agents consuming it. And this is really important for you as an enterprise. If you're thinking about this from an enterprise perspective, you really have to start thinking about how your agents are going to consume your MCP servers, because it changes like your security. It changes your guardrails. It changes what you're going to prompt, because agents don't have a human necessarily to answer that prompt question that we expect the protocol to offer. The third thing here is like data is king. So I say this flippantly, but it's just not. Every single day, I think it becomes more and more obvious that one of the moats that businesses are going to have is their data. And so getting your thick clients and your agents access to data with security guardrails and fast lookups, but constrained to be usable by the agents is incredibly important. So enterprise architects need to start thinking about this today. You need to think about how you're bringing your data to your agents and your LLMs and your models today. The last thing about it is like LLMs can only do so much. And this is something that the folks that I talk to that are not super deep in AI and they just watch it from the outside, it is amazing the things that they think AI can do. Like they think AI is this close to curing world hunger. And maybe it is, but at the end of the day, like AI can't, it still has a lot of trouble adding numbers, especially as you get to larger numbers. It still has a lot of trouble with big data. It still has a lot of trouble managing like large sheets and analyzing large sheets. And so LLMs are going to be around. So LLMs are obviously amazing, but MCP has been around for a very, very long time. And giving the LLMs and giving the clients tools to use the data and just being very cognizant of the things that they can't do is incredibly important for any enterprise architect thinking about how to do this. So the way that we talk about this, the way that I get super excited about this is that instead of thinking about an API gateway, which is this one-way flow of requests, where requests come in, you do some processing, maybe do some auth checks, maybe do some other stuff here, and then they get forwarded on to backend services. That's not how I like to think about the world anymore. I think about the world as a nexus, which is to say that within a world that's AI-enabled, you have a bunch of different capabilities that all need to complement each other. You obviously have tools. Tools are the most important thing that we are all doing. That's what MCP is built on. I think of tools as pretty much anything. Like tools are very broadly defined inside of the MCP world. So tools are part of it. But obviously agents are there, which is the idea that like you need to have a central place where you can take an agent, you can give it access to one or two tools. tools, or you can give it access to 1 or 2 data sources, or you can constrict its security based off of whoever is calling into it. And so it's not enough to think about like, how is data flowing into my enterprise system? It is to say, like, how are my agents interacting with my data? How are my agents interacting with my tools? And how is security guiding all of that here? So these slides will be available so you can kind of go through this, but this is how I've begun to think about how to architect enterprise level capabilities for agents. Is think about these, like, pick a topic. So like, one of the things I'm going to talk about a lot here around the enterprise best practices is that there's one of the biggest issues with MCP today is that so this is the first one right here. MCP begins to falter after 20 tools, and it flat out fails after 40. If you give an MCP, if you give a default client access to a 100-tool MCP server, it will pick the worst possible tool 80% of the time to do what you want it to do. And so part of how you have to start thinking about building these systems is you have to think about building these nexuses of capabilities. And so I'm going to give an example later, and I'm going to walk through a demo of how we created like a random number generator, because that's actually another thing that LLMs are terrible at is random number generation. And so part of that is like I created a nexus that was for a random number, and it has things like it has tools in there, it has some security, and it might have some data. Random is a bad example because there's not a lot of data there, but you need to start thinking about this in terms of like, I'm going to create a nexus for some sort of capability that my team has. So a great example of this I love talking about would be emails. Like, instead of thinking about like, oh, I'm going to expose one giant MCP server, every single capability that you possibly can do in Office. And I love talking about Office because Office, if you go onto the Office 365 and look at their REST API has 26,000 endpoints. So like the idea of MCP enabling Office, I know there's MCPs out there right now. We're kind of working through all these things, but like the idea of generally MCPifying Office is incredibly complex. And so, what you want to do is, instead of saying like, how do we MCPify all of Office 365, you say, okay, what are the scenarios that I want to enable? This is for you guys as enterprise folks kind of implement this at your organization. And like, one of the things you might want to enable is sending an email. And so you create a nexus, you sort of contemplate this as create a nexus for sending email. And that nexus might have things like, draft the email, reference a resource or a set of data for your address book. It might have a spell check tool, things like that. So that's how you want to start thinking about this, is like, what is this like nexus of capabilities I'm going to bring together that is small enough and constrained enough that an LLM can consume it and think about it, but broad enough and expansive enough to be powerful, because we still all need to actually do stuff here. Second best practice for MCP on the enterprise here is security scope your tools. So I joke about this, but like context is a precious commodity. It's in fact the last precious commodity we all have here. And so the more tools you put into your context, the worse off you are. So one of the things, the way that we approach as a Traego is that we actually allow you to say, hey, these three tools as part of an MCP server require this scope. And so if we see a token come in that doesn't have that scope, we're actually not going to expose those tools to that particular user. And so think about that through and through, and really think about how you can just take everything you can do to constrain down the number of resources, the number of tools, the number of prompts, the different capabilities your MCP server is exposing, the better it will operate over time. I like to throw this in here because it's kind of fun. Tool name compatibility is a mess. So this is one of those things, like if you are going from REST into OpenAPI, like you have an OpenAPI or a Swagger doc, and you want to make that MCP enabled, you need to have, it's a maximum of 64 characters for OpenAPI. Anthropic can handle more. Goose can handle more. Different models can handle different things. OpenAPI can only do A to Z, lowercase, uppercase, numbers, and then dash and underscore. So you have to like think about the tool name compatibility pretty early on. And then you have to think about design compatibility. And this is what Ravi started to get at, is that like all of the clients are just a little bit different of what they support. Some support the newest OAuth models, some support elicitation, some don't. And what's going to happen is, as an enterprise user, like the first thing that people say when they start thinking about MCP is they're like, well, you control the client. Like I'm just going to use the client and I can control it. But you don't. Like, in order to design a really good MCP server for an enterprise, you need to be ready for agents to consume that who may or may not understand elicitation or sampling or anything like that. You need to design it for the basic off-the-shelf clients like Claude and ChatGPT and all those, VS Code, but you have to design it for like the really simple ones that are going to be totally stateless, just web-based for agent interaction there. So think about how to design for compatibility and really maximize compatibility, because that's where there will be so many models and so many different ways that your MCP server is going to be getting exposed. They want to start there. I have a couple of really helpful patterns I'm going to throw out, and then we're going to dive over to a quick demo here. But there's 4 patterns that I love, and we use them internally, and I use them across the board. So one is, there's a model, like there is no clean way in MCP to do tool search or resource search. I have an open API, an open PR against MCP, the Model Context Protocol itself, if you want to go and give it a thumbs up to do search. But right now, the main way you do it is you do it through this model called progressive tool disclosure, progressive resource disclosure. So the idea is you expose a very, very simple tool that says like, hey, you know, the tool name will be search or expose capability or like switch to. And this is how we kind of do it at Traego, is you can actually install this one tool and build this as part of your capabilities. And so you have a progressive tool, you say it exposes that one thing, a model calls into it, you return, hey, okay, that's great. And then you send a notification with a tool change. And at that point, you're going to add a bunch of new tools that you have access to. This is really, really cool, and it's using the protocol well. This works best if you control the client. So if you actually control the client, you can kind of work with this. If you're using a reasoning model, you know, one of the O4s, things like that, one of the O models, things like that, it is pretty good at connecting the dots of like, hey, I just said this and I saw this notification. Maybe I'll retry something else here. But if you are using the standard models, they just often will not handle this at all. So progressive tool disclosure is how to keep your tools. If you do have 26,000 endpoints and you want to keep it tight, then this is how you would do it: is you expose a tool that helps you get to the next set of tools from it. This is something that's new, and I'm super excited about this, which is MCP first. We're doing this at Traego, which is, I have a thesis, and I think there's a lot of people that would agree with me, but maybe I'm insane, I don't know, that says in like a couple of years, agents and LLMs will be the main thing using your app. So if you are building a brand new app today, like you have the option of building it with REST and then throwing an MCP wrapper around it, or you have the option of just building MCP first. And that's what we've done. Like when you get into Traego, we expose a nexus that's a public nexus that anyone can kind of touch, that gives you all the capabilities to work with Traego, because we built everything you can do in the UI, you can do as an agent. And that's like very intentional. Like this is a deep part of our philosophy, is that like agents can be doing all this stuff. So you should build MCP first. Open API to MCP is going, like, I saw a great comment on Reddit the other day where someone's just like, wow, will people stop building open AI, open API to MCP, mappers? And at the end of the day, like, it's a great sentiment, because that person is absolutely right. MCP is not necessarily designed to just take a REST endpoint and completely wrap it and expose it. You have to be judicious. But everybody has REST endpoints, and that's how these are going to get exposed. So for the enterprise architects there, thinking about how to like scale into their first MCP server, start with taking a couple of open API, Swagger docs, and exposing them as MCP and kind of doing it that way. The last point here, I'll skip over quickly, is look at a high level, MCP from the enterprise perspective. The way we've been doing it with a focus on local MCP servers is a security nightmare. So, I mean, for the enterprise, it is incredibly fair to say that remote is the way this is going to go. I mean, like, you talk to developers, they don't love that, but this is just the way that it's going to go for enterprises, because it is just so dangerous to deploy code locally to people's machines. But if you're going to do it, the way that we've seen this be successful is that folks are basically building up curated lists of these MCP servers. They're doing full security reviews of it. They're pushing that code down from a central, config management service, and then enabling it that way. So curated local server lists is a good way to do it. But honestly, for folks that are out there building, like, I have a very, very deep belief, and I love arguing about this kind of stuff because it's super fun to pontificate. But I have a pretty deep belief that like remote servers are going to eat the world, because it is just so dangerous to run code. For developers, it's totally fine. We all think about the developer use case, and I'll code review to make sure it's good. But for everybody else, no one wants to kind of do it. Okay, got a couple minutes left, so we're going to dive in really, really quickly to a demo here. So this is Traego, and if you're interested, like the way we design this is you sign up as an organization, and you can create as many of these little nexuses as you want. And the idea is you're going to combine a bunch of different backends, like REST backends, MCP backends, data backends, and put all those together and create a MCP server that really is just going to handle one particular use case. So here's the MCP server that actually got exposed. This is all enabled for auth. So you can come in here and you can actually hook this up to your own OAuth that you use. So if you're using Scalekit, that's a great example. If you have your own OAuth internally, you can do that. We've built this so that any of the tools that we expose or any of the capabilities we expose, you can actually limit by scope. So a lot of the stuff, the best practices I'm talking about, we've built into Traego. But look at, don't necessarily use us. Like think about the Nexus model for yourself as you're using this. I hooked this up to a really fun little sample swagger here that just has some random stuff. So what we did is I had this built up so you can say generate, so that we had some sort of default commands that were exposed as REST endpoints. But this is a really good example where random string is not something that's a great LLM consumable name. So you can come in here, you can change that and just say generate random string right there. That's this idea of basically moving your MCP server, like giving your REST. If you are going to start with a REST server, which so many people are, you're going to want to take that path and add a bunch of context to it, make it smarter. And this is it. That's all it kind of takes. And we also have data and resources could be data that you pull in from other places and wikis and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like we're going to create this little nexus that's hyper focused on randomization here, random numbers, random strings, random drops. And I'm going to take this. I already load this up into VS Code. And so I dropped it in here. We have full support for the OAuth 2.1 spec. So you can come in here and it'll prompt you to go and OAuth and all that kind of stuff. And I'll just ask this guy right here, hey, I'm playing some D&D, give me a loot drop. And that's one of our tools we have here. So it's going to call it, of course, not work, because that's amazing. That's both Ravi and I got bit by the demo gods here. Let's try one more time. Let's try one more time. There we go. Now it works. And I got a single piece of plus. That's not a very good. That is not a very good draw there. Single piece of +1 ammunition. But that's it. So it's the idea that you can kind of like, as opposed to thinking about MCP servers as MCP servers by themselves, think holistically about resources, tools, capabilities, other agents you might want to interact with, all that together as a nexus. And that's how you should start to design these things out. And then Traego is a place where you can actually do that. So all right, thanks so much. 21 minutes, 1 minute over. I'm sorry, guys. That's on me.
I like that you had your own timer going. Well done, Pat. It was a good demonstration, good conversation. Lots of great tips in there. Would love to hear just a little bit more about the company itself. So what size are you guys? Where are you at in your life cycle? Is Traego been around for a while? Is it a new company? Can you give me a little bit of the background of the company and how big you guys are, what your role is there, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, Traego's we are brand new in this space. We are looking at really focusing on this particular use case in general, which is enterprise, and I personally am involved in a bunch of different things, but like this sort of keeps on coming up and again over and over again, is like, how do we start to design larger enterprise MCP servers? It just is one of those big issues that like MCP as a protocol was designed, it was designed with a bias towards very, very small servers. And it was designed, I mean, honestly, like if you think about like how MCP evolved, where like the first version was standard IO only, it was designed against it was so designed for developers and for small like use cases. As I've been getting deeper into AI and as I've been getting more involved with this stuff, like it's become so obvious that there's a need for better ways to scale MCP servers. So it's something that like everything I've been doing around AI has all led to this thing that says like, it's awesome when you have, if you're a developer, it's great. But if you are really trying to do enterprise use cases where you might have 100 different services, all this kind of stuff, it is MCP as a protocol needs some love. So that's kind of where Traego came from, is we started thinking about like, what does it take to actually enable MCP for enterprises? Because the protocol by itself today does not do it. It is okay, but it's just not the way enterprises think about problems. It's just not the scale that enterprises tend to kind of operate at. So we're a smaller, newer group working on this stuff.
Nice. And when you think about, the ideal customer profile for something like this, that is it the AI organization at a company? Is it the development team that's trying to build specific agents and wants to sort of create these nexuses as a way to simplify the MCP management? Is it someone in the department that's, like in the HR department that's trying to build a specific app? Like, who do you see as sort of feeling the pain of this right now? Because I think when I talk to a lot of companies, it seems like MCP is already being consumed pretty heavily. They're building MCP servers, but it is the Wild West. They're being put in lots of different places. They're being sort of built by engineers. They're being sort of non-centrally managed. So who do you go to sell this? Like, who do you see as the company that would buy it? Who in the company would buy this?
Yeah. It is, in a lot of ways, it's a developer first toolkit for folks, or it's a developer first opportunity for companies that are trying to figure out how to do this kind of like enterprise MCP in a little bit of a compliant way. So if you really do just want to let your developers go out and start building MCP servers, that's one thing. And a lot of developers are doing that because this is, it's new stuff. Developers love new things more than anything else in the entire world. So you give guys like new tools to go do this, but that's not a way to systematically build something, right? So if you are serious, if you are a SaaS company and you are getting serious about AI enabling your existing workflows, you have kind of two different options. You can either start to build up MCP servers. You look at something like GitHub has done a phenomenal job because Microsoft is just pushing MCP so hard. So GitHub has done a phenomenal job MCPifying like all of their APIs, all that kind of stuff. Not every enterprise has the either the visionary leadership or the extra developer resources to go and start rewriting a bunch of their actual REST APIs as MCP servers. So that's one of the things is like, we see this as that, we want to look at a way where a company could very quickly stand up, could basically very quickly AIify their SaaS offering using these nexuses that says like, hey, all right, we are Figma and we're going to expose our docs and a couple of capabilities around, designing out web pages into one server, one nexus, and light that up. Or even if you get to other folks that are out there that are maybe not full AI or enterprise, that maybe are not like SaaS companies themselves, but they just have a bunch of tools internally. So like every company anymore in the entire world is a tech company anymore, right? Like, sure. Everybody has HR systems, everyone has ERP systems, but not all those guys necessarily have the capability. Like, if you've built a little internal tool for HR management, you don't necessarily have the capabilities to relight that up with an MCP server, but you have all the same pressures the rest of us do, right? Everybody has the same pressure that we are all now expected to do way more with way less people. Like, that is the driving force for the next 5 years. We'll be doing more with less people, and incredible pressure on that. And so being able taking Traego and using it to light up your internal HRMS system that you had built 20 years ago for AI is a great example of who we think would actually use this.
Makes sense. Well, did you have some questions you wanted to ask Pat?
Yeah, I have one. Maybe a clarification. I think the thing that piqued my interest was when you said, but the tool problems, you have 20, it starts failing, 40, it just doesn't even work anymore. Does Traego allow you to, I know you can customize the tools and then publish it as MCP servers. There was actually other SaaS that do something very similar. But the thing I may have, maybe I didn't hear it right, but do you dynamically expose what tools are available based on the authorization of the scope of resources I can? So for example, if I were to create MC and I put 100 because that's just my SaaS and I don't know which one the users might end up using, but based on when the user authenticates and it says, look, I just say email, I just really need access my email. Do you limit the scope of what the MCP servers now expose and say, no, you really only have one tool? I know I got 100 configured, but what I'm presenting to the client now is you just got one MCP with one tool. Therefore, we know that it's a very, very high chance of the actual request working. Is that what? Is that? It's more of a clarification. Is that what Traego does? Oh, okay,
That's one of the capabilities, is the ability is that we basically, for each of the tools that we bring in, whether it be from an MCP server or from a REST server or whatever it is, we let you set the scopes that would actually trigger that tool to be displayed, so you can dynamically collapse it. And then we also have a model where you can run it in the dynamic in the progressive disclosure mode, where what we're going to do is we're only going to show one tool up front, and then you can interact with that tool to then get access to the rest of the tools over time. So we do both of them, and it's a really good call out from your side, because it's the best way to work with agents, because agents, you can give agents custom OAuth tokens that you then really manage the scopes of. So there's different ways to kind of like enable agents within it. The way we do it is you can either take an agent and actually add different tools to that agent has visibility into, or you can take an agent, you can give it a set of scopes, and then you can limit the scope so that is now how you are controlling what the agent has visibility into. It's funny, Will, like I genuinely believe this, like we haven't thought enough about agentic use cases for MCP. Like it's what, like we are all gung-ho about, inside your IDE, inside Claude, that kind of use case. But there's a ton of really complex work to be done on how agents are going to interact with MCP servers, how they're going to do authentication, how they're going to do double hop auth of like, I'm talking to Bob, and then I'm an agent, I'm talking to Bob, but I have my MCP server over here. How do I authenticate Bob, but then also, transfer that impersonation through the next thing? All this stuff is greenfield. And so they're all pieces that we're kind of working on. And, the part I showed is the first thing we're releasing here, but we're thinking about it holistically.
Yeah, the other thing you mentioned was the outlook on it, because it's just from our personal experience for Shannon and I, when we built our first Microsoft Office connector, whatever, for LLMs, we realized there's so many, you can't just expose everything, nothing work. So we had to write, before MCP, we had to write our own layer that combined multiple APIs just to get an email or just to get a contact, whatever that may be. There was just not one call. We had to reverse engineer those, because nobody understands. If we couldn't understand it, I don't even understand how LLMs could understand how to make the right call or the sequence of calls to just do a simple email or something like that. And so I fully understand the pain.
And the thing I hear most often in response to me saying that is like, oh, well, Gemini has 2 million tokens. And it's true, like Gemini does now have 2 million tokens. It's not perfect. If you put 2 million tokens into Gemini, it's not perfect, but then also that costs you money. So like it's not just the pure degradation of the actual experience, the LLM's ability to understand. It also is the monetary impact that, like, you add a bunch of tokens, you suddenly spent a bunch of money on this capability. And like, hey, maybe if you don't need all those things, just show 10, 20 tools, or show 5 tools.
Cool. All right.
This was a lot of fun, man. Thanks so much for coming and sharing so much. Congratulations on getting the product out there. When did you guys launch Traego? Was it
about a month ago?
All right, so we're really the first people we're showing it to. Thanks so much.
First people that we're showing it to. So thanks so much, Shannon. I appreciate it. Love to come on in.
Is there a free trial? Can people try it for free and get a feel for it?
There's a totally free version. So if you just want to use this for yourself, there's kind of public nexuses that are out there. So if there's a totally free version you can use for yourself and connect to public nexuses, and there's a free trial for businesses that want to use this.
Awesome, buddy. Well, thanks so much.
Awesome.
Maybe come back sometime and talk to us about ScaledMCP, because
I want to say that when we do the next developer summit, to talk about how to really scale this stuff out, because that's like the really deep technical talk with code and all that kind of stuff, because it is tricky to scale MCP out. Like we haven't put enough time into it.
We'll start working on your paper, because I think we'll be making some announcements about the next one very, very, very shortly. So
I love it, man. Amazing.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful Thursday, and thanks, Pat, for joining us all the way from your vacation in Milan. And continue today, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care.
Thanks, folks.